You would not expect a quiet pub in a beautiful rural part of England to be the setting for an execution-style killing. But in March 2010, a single shot to the back of the head ended the life of a beautiful young woman in just this kind of way, in just this kind of place. What compels someone to do that to the woman who they previously cherished and loved? Stay with me, and I'll take you through the grim tale of Michael Tucker and Rebecca Thorpe. Michael Tucker was born in 1961 in the village of Swanley in Kent. It's a lovely little rural village. I know it well. I went to school not too far from there. He grew up in rather a large family. He had no less than 6 siblings, 3 brothers and 3 sisters. But at the young age of 17, he decided he wanted to fly the family nest, and he went off to join the army. After a relatively brief period in the army, he decided it wasn't really for him, and so he requested release, and this was granted. Like quite a few former servicemen, he had a bit of difficulty with employment and went from one casual job to another. Eventually, he decided to change his luck and moved to the Republic of Ireland. It was during this period in Ireland that he met a lady who he fell in love with and he felt he could have a future with. So they settled down together and started a family. By 1996, things had run their course in Ireland for the Tucker family. Michael moved back to the UK and took over a pub called the Dray and Horses. It was a lovely little pub, and any outsider would look on the business and think that Michael and his family were doing really well. The business venture seemed to be a success, and this went on for some 12 years. But over their years together, Michael and his wife had started to have a bit of a breakdown in their marriage. And after they moved back to England and took over the pub, things did not get any better. It was around about this time that Michael found himself in need of a new chef at the pub, and he took on a lady called Rebecca Thorpe. Rebecca was 20 years younger than Michael. She was born in 1981 in the village of Thorpe in Norfolk, and she would be described by her family as quite a shy child. She also had a little bit of a mischievous streak, and she went on to go to school in a local village called Downham Market. It was here that she fell in love with hockey. She was really good at it. At one point, she could see a future in the game. During this period, she played for a local ladies team called Denver Ladies and excelled at the game. But also during this period, she got herself a Saturday job at a local hotel and restaurant. And it was here that things went off on a bit of a different tack for her. Even though she loved hockey, she fell in love with cooking as well, and could also see a future for herself as a chef. And so her love of cooking led her, when she left school, to go on to college to study as a chef. And after qualifying, she went on to run a restaurant and a kitchen in a pub owned by an old friend. Unfortunately, due to the business climate, this post didn't last forever. Her friend had to make her redundant and let her go, just due to business pressures. And it was at this point, after the redundancy, that she would go on to apply for a job at Michael Tucker's pub. I mentioned that she was 20 years Michael's junior, but in spite of this, she found him quite charismatic and she was charmed by him. Michael, rightly or wrongly, played up to this. But we've got to look at the environment under which this happened. Michael and his wife were having problems. There was a young lady that had just come to work at his pub who also found him attractive and charming. So the inevitable happened. Michael and Rebecca started to have an affair. It wasn't long before Michael's wife started to suspect that there was something going on. She just saw the interplay between Michael and Rebecca. And so she started to have a scout around. She looked at his phone and found incriminating, if you want to call it that, texts between the pair. And so it was all out in the open. But this caused a massive argument between Michael and his wife. The outcome was that she packed her bags, got the children, and left the pub. She took them back to the Republic of Ireland. Now, this didn't bother Michael. His marriage had been rocky anyway, and he was now infatuated and having an affair with Rebecca. So he moved Rebecca into the pub. They began running the pub together. This worked out fine because Rebecca was popular with the locals as a chef, and now she was effectively the landlady as well. Business seemed good. And so did her relationship with Tucker. She did the usual thing, introduced him to her parents, and the future looked bright. But she had itchy feet, and so did Michael. She wanted to get a new business. She had a little bit of money of her own tucked away, and because at this stage she trusted Michael, she decided she would invest in their future in another business with him. So they started looking around for another business, another pub. They found one which they felt was absolutely ideal for them. It was called the Compasses Inn, and this was in a place called Snettisham in Norfolk, another little rural pub in a rural village. And at Easter 2009, they had a grand, call it a reopening of the pub. Rebecca, as the chef, laid on a grand spread for those who came. All of Rebecca's dreams were coming true. She'd met a man who she thought was going to be her future, and now she had her own business. Little did she know that those dreams were going to fragment and come tumbling down. The major thing that she did not know about Michael was that he was a chronic alcoholic, a drinker. Now, this in turn caused him to be quite unstable and also quite a cheater within his relationships. Michael drank constantly. He would start drinking almost immediately when he woke up in the morning and would continue to drink for most of the day. But in spite of his drinking, he seemed to function quite well in public. Without knowing the truth of his drinking and what it was doing to the business, any outsider might have thought that things were just fine between Tucker and Rebecca. But unbeknown to Rebecca, Michael Tucker also had a depressive side to him. This is quite often the case with alcoholism. And about a week or so after the grand opening of the pub, she went into the lounge to find him comatose. Naturally, at first she thought this was due to him being worse for wear for drink. But then she realised he'd taken an overdose, so she immediately called an ambulance and he was hauled off to hospital. He was treated quite quickly in hospital and he made a full recovery. But we've got to start looking at what led him to do this in the first place. After he came out of hospital, Rebecca quizzed him, but he was unable to tell her why he'd taken the tablets or whether this was a serious attempt. So it's all adding to the picture of quite an unstable chap. At any rate, they had to close the pub for a couple of days while he fully recovered. Rebecca now had some hard thinking to do. She had to decide whether it was worth staying with Michael. Did she now have a future with him, knowing that he drank constantly, he was unstable, he'd had this issue with him taking the tablets, and his drinking was having an effect on the business. He was drinking the profits away, and money was beginning to get a bit tight. Now add to this, in both his sober and drunken moments, Michael was becoming more and more possessive. Rebecca was a very attractive young lady. She was very popular with the locals, and she liked to engage in banter with some of the guys that came into the pub. But whenever she engaged in conversation with some of the male patrons, this did not go down well with Michael. He was obviously quite jealous, and sometimes he would even go to the extent of going up behind her and throwing his arms round her waist, as if to say, "She's mine, you can't have her." But Rebecca was tied to Michael in several ways. To start with, she'd been emotionally tied to him. She was also financially involved with him, and I guess this is why she decided to soldier on. But whilst he was drinking, she was left to run the bar and the pub pretty much solo. And this included cooking meals as well. Usually while she was doing this, Michael would just sit and chat with the locals and drink pint after pint. And that's when he was actually present at the Compasses Inn. More often than not, he'd slope off and go and have a few pints in one of the other village pubs, either the Rose and Crown or the Queen Victoria. And all the while, the business was suffering. They were no longer making the money they had been. Michael was not contributing to the business. In fact, quite the reverse. They were getting closer and closer to bankruptcy. And Michael would later give the excuse that it was due to the stresses of what was going on. But he just completely disappeared for 3 weeks. Rebecca didn't know where he'd gone. But after 3 weeks, he resurfaced all of a sudden, back in Swanley. He made Rebecca aware of where he was, and she went and picked him up. When she did so, he gave her some story about apparently being away in rehab for 3 weeks. But he didn't want to tell her in case it all fell through. Rebecca wanted to believe him, but all the while she believed his drinking was now completely out of control. And on top of this, for some obscure reason, Michael had now been in contact with his ex, and he continued to stay in contact with her. Surreptitious messages that he hid from Rebecca. There was another failed suicide attempt, and at that time Michael again spent some time in hospital. Rebecca didn't visit him, but she made a terrible error when he was released. She moved back with him, or let him move back in, shall we say, although by this point they were sleeping in separate beds. We've already gleaned that Michael was extremely jealous about Rebecca. This got even worse when he got wind of a rumour, and this was put about by one of the wives of a patron, saying that Rebecca was having an affair with one of the customers. Now, there was no definitive evidence of this, just the woman's say-so. It was in fact her husband who she thought Rebecca was having an affair with. But Michael just passed it off. He joked about it, but he also said something more sinister. He said, "It's not true, and if I thought it was, I'd shoot the pair of them." It was the first time that anyone had heard him make an open threat against Rebecca. But secretly, this rumour began to eat away at Michael. It gnawed away in his brain, wondering and wondering whether it was true. It didn't seem to matter to him that he'd also taken up with another local woman. He was having an affair himself. And things just grew steadily worse. His jealousy became worse and worse every time Rebecca set foot out the door, whether it was to go and play sports or just have a night out with her friends. He hated it, and it was the source of constant arguments. Now, moving forward to March the 9th, 2010. Day started as normal, the pub was opened up, but it was particularly busy that day. When questioned after the events that I'm just about to recount, Michael would say that he and Rebecca had a great day. They even went and made love in the afternoon. Moving on to the evening, they opened up the pub again as normal, and the evening was pretty uneventful. But at closing time, Rebecca had had enough of the day, and she said she was going upstairs to run herself a bath. After closing up the bar, Tucker followed up, and it was at this point a fairly awful conversation took place. Now, we only have this on Michael's say-so, but he would later state Rebecca told him she didn't want him in contact with his ex, she didn't want him seeing his children again, and she also allegedly admitted to having an affair behind his back. This naturally made Michael very angry, especially as Rebecca said it quite laughingly. He told her he was going off to get changed and possibly put a clean shirt on which he was going to iron, but he did not do this. Instead, while she was in the bath, he went out and got a shotgun. Now, this was a shotgun that he had in his possession at the pub, but he had the shotgun illegally. Now, I'm sure a lot of you know that to have a shotgun in your possession, you have to go through stringent police checks, you have to have it in a secure gun cabinet, and the police have to be satisfied that you're a fairly stable character and that you may have a legitimate use for the shotgun, for example, hunting. None of this pertained to Michael Tucker. As far as I can determine, it wasn't a 12-bore shotgun, it was a slightly smaller gauge called a 410, but nonetheless lethal. After leaving Rebecca in the bath, he went and got the shotgun. He then coldly and coolly loaded the shotgun. He then went back into the bathroom where Rebecca had her back to him, and without saying anything further, he raised the shotgun, pointed it at the back of her head, and shot her execution style. Rebecca was killed immediately. The shotgun blast gave her devastating injuries to the back of the head. She probably wouldn't have known anything about it. And here's where Michael Tucker's behaviour gets even colder and stranger. He left the dead body of Rebecca in the bath. He went into the bedroom, wrapped the shotgun in plastic, and then secreted it under their mattress. And this is how things stayed. Gun under the mattress, Rebecca dead in the bath full of water. He then went on to open the pub up as normal in the morning, as if nothing had happened. When questioned about Rebecca and her whereabouts, he said, she'd gone away to stay with some friends for a short while. She'll be back soon. But his story would chop and change depending on which particular customer he was talking to. Sometimes she was away staying with friends, other times she'd gone to visit family. But as I mentioned earlier, previously Michael Tucker had taken up with another local lady, and shockingly he invited her to the pub. And it is alleged that he took her into the pub accommodation and had, shall we say, sexual relations with her in his and Rebecca's bed. All the while, Rebecca was dead in the bath, and the shotgun, wrapped in plastic, was under the mattress. Of course, the next day, Michael found himself short of staff, so he put an advert out saying he wanted new staff for the pub. He also started drinking really, really heavily as well, whether this is a function of what he'd done or whether it was just normal behaviour. But by all accounts, he was stumbling and staggering all over the place. It's estimated that Rebecca lay dead for approximately 2 days, and all the while Michael, despite his drinking, tried to get on with business as usual, running the pub. But at the end of this period, he realised he had to do something. So he emptied the bathwater, got Rebecca's body out and wrapped it in a duvet. He then proceeded to wrap her and the duvet in plastic and took her down to an outhouse where he had a large chest freezer. He put her body into the freezer, closed the lid, and then weighed down the lid with some beer kegs that were also in the outhouse. He cleaned up the bathroom and then tried to get on again with business as usual. But the questions were piling up. People were beginning to wonder at this stage where Rebecca was. They hadn't seen hide nor hair of her. But he kept on plying them with the same old story. She's gone to visit family. She's staying with friends. Don't worry about her. Everything's fine. But suspicions were being aroused. But after the following weekend, the pressure got to him, and he decided he had to go. He had to leave the place. Now, this was a full 10 days after Rebecca had been killed. So he jumped in her car and drove to Portsmouth, and there he caught a ferry to the Isle of Wight. But once in the Isle of Wight, whether he was overcome by guilt or just couldn't stand the pressure of what he'd done, he started sending texts to his new lover. And this was on the 23rd of March. Some of the messages that he sent were unintelligible. Others said things like, "It's just not your fault. Don't worry, it's not your fault." And when she quizzed him about this, he was again very vague. But she said, "Don't worry. Whatever it is, we can get through it. I'll forgive you." And it was at this point he responded, "What? Even for murder? It's Rebecca. It'll be on the TV next week and in the papers." His new lover was completely horrified. But it got worse. He then went on to give her directions to where Rebecca's body lay. He told her that she was in the freezer in the outhouse. He said, "Just have a stiff drink and let the police deal with the whole thing. Don't get involved." So she went to the pub and showed the text to one of the staff there. He in turn flagged down a off-duty police officer who was one of the patrons of the pub but happened to be close by. They both went to the outhouse and the police officer investigated the freezer, and it was then that he found Rebecca's dead and frozen body. Pretty soon police were swarming all over the place, but forensics would have to wait for Rebecca's body to effectively defrost before a post-mortem could be carried out. Now, this would eventually determine that she had received a massive traumatic gunshot wound to the back of her head. Police immediately started a murder investigation, and Tucker was traced to the Isle of Wight. Watches were put out in various places on the island, and he was arrested. When he was brought back to the mainland and questioned, he admitted murdering Rebecca. He also told the police where the weapon was, hidden under his mattress. He was charged with murder and sent for trial at Norwich Crown Court. The trial began on the 16th of May 2011, and Michael Tucker, despite having admitted shooting Rebecca, pleaded guilty to manslaughter, but he denied her murder. The trial went on, and his defence team would claim that he was suffering from extreme alcohol dependency and depression at the time of the shooting. But jury went out to deliberate, and it took them only 45 minutes to convict him of murder. On the 24th of May, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum to be served of 26 years. He would go on to appeal this sentence and would have moderate success in doing so, in that he got the sentence reduced by 4 years to 22 years. One of the investigating officers, Chief Inspector Jess Fry, said that the verdict was the right one. He was guilty, and he refused to accept that Michael Tucker didn't know what he was doing. He said it was a completely deliberate, cold and calculated act, and he sent his condolences to the family and the local community, who were also in shock. After the verdict, many tributes were paid to Rebecca, not least by her family and friends. And here at Utterly Unbelievable, we also send our condolences to her family, her friends, the local community, and anyone who knew her. It was a terrible tragedy and a heinous crime committed by a man who then tried to pass it off as diminished responsibility. Luckily, justice was served, and this man will not be released for a very, very long time. And on that note, I'll ask you to stay curious and stay safe, and I'll thank you for watching.